I'll do the introductions. Fine, we'll take over. Great, thank you all for being here. We're delighted to be joined by Kazumi Ogawa, who, as you know, is the director of UNMAS, UN Mine Action Service, and with her here is Paul Heslop, who works on demining issues in Ukraine. And if we could put on the screen our colleague Nick Pond from the Mine Action Service in Afghanistan, please. Great, I think we see Nick. So Kazumi, please, go ahead.
Thank you, Steph. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kazumi Ogawa. I'm the newly appointed director of the UN Mine Action Service. I started my service with UNMAS at the beginning of February. It's very nice to meet you all. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the work of the UN Mine Action Service. The work of UNMAS is driven by the needs of the community and the people affected by conflict, in particular to address threats posed by explosive hazards to civilians, peacekeepers, and humanitarians. Our job, when UNMAS can do its job, is to save lives. It protects civilians. It enables peacekeepers to operate in safety. It facilitates the work of the of the delivery of humanitarian aid. It supports the work of the return of the voluntary return of internally displaced persons and refugees. And finally, the work of UNMAS helps set the conditions for long-term peace and development. The UN Mine Action Service also plays a vital role in advocating for international humanitarian law and international human rights law, as well as the global disarmament conventions. So I think each one of us that has been in the field in a post-conflict environment has some horrible story about a child picking something up that looks like a toy, or otherwise, and has had it explode, or we know of some livelihood that's been destroyed by landmines or explosive ordnance. These types of incidents, they not only destroy a life, they destroy communities and livelihoods. And so when we are able to prevent an incident like this, it means that we're preventing, or we're allowing a household to continue its work. We're allowing a community to help with the recovery. And this is what I wanted to talk a little bit about today. It was in this spirit that the General Assembly in December of 2005 declared April 4th the International Day for Mine Awareness and Assistance in Mine Action. The purpose of the day, as you can imagine, is to raise awareness about what it means to live in a community that's contaminated by unexploded ordnance and landmines. UNMAS not only supports clearance itself, it works with national governments and national organizations to establish and develop the capacity to be able to combat this scourge themselves as well. An investment in mine action is an investment in peace. It's an investment in the futures of millions of people affected by these terrible and indiscriminate weapons. And it's my pleasure and my honor to introduce two of my colleagues today. You see right next to me Paul Heslop, who's the UN Mine Action Service Special Advisor to the Resident Coordinator in Ukraine. And on the screen, we have Mr. Nicholas Pond, the Chief of the UN Mine Action Program in Afghanistan. Let me pass the floor first to Nick. Over to you, Nick. Thank you very much. Nick from Kabul.
Thanks very much, Kazumi. As stated, my name is Nick Pond. I'm the Chief of the Mine Action Section in the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, based in Kabul. Afghanistan has the third highest explosive ordnance casualty rate in the world, with around 50 people killed or injured every month, of which almost 80% are children. That means there's at least one casualty every single day, and that casualty is most likely to be a child. 90% of these casualties are from unexploded ordnance and abandoned munitions that have been left behind after over 40 years of conflict. Most of these casualties are boys, typically killed or injured when tampering with ordnance that they find when tending animals or playing. On the 12th of February this year, a group of boys in Nangarhar found an item of unexploded ordnance and threw it into a fire. The device detonated, killing 2 boys on the spot and wounding 5 others, one of whom subsequently died from his wounds. There are over 1,000 square kilometers of land known to be contaminated in Afghanistan. That's over 140,000 soccer pitches. almost 3 million people, around 900 education facilities, and over 200 healthcare facilities are known to be within 1 kilometre of explosive ordnance contamination, although these figures could be much higher as many districts have yet to be fully surveyed. The biggest challenge faced by the sector is the lack of funding. Reduced support for a country that sits way down the list of global humanitarian priorities, governed by a de facto authority that is not internationally recognised, has reduced the number of deminers delivering clearance, risk education and victim assistance from around 15,000 in 2011 down to 1,300 this month. Coupled with almost 2.8 million returnees from neighbouring countries last year, earthquakes, floods, and an ongoing conflict with Pakistan, these are exceptionally challenging times for the Afghan people. However, there's much opportunity for mine action in Afghanistan. This is the birthplace of humanitarian demining, and a depth of expertise exists within the national and international NGOs. The de facto authorities are supportive of the sector, and improved security situation means that access is possible across most of the country, and Afghanistan is a signatory to all international demining conventions. With increased funding, there is a very real opportunity to free this country from contamination, allowing Afghan people to restore their livelihoods unhindered by the remnants of war. Thank you.
Mr. Heslop?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be briefing you again. I want to speak. I'm currently based in Ukraine, but I would also like to highlight how this is not just a problem in Ukraine; it's a problem in many places. And I think one of the things that we, as the UN Mine Action Service, are looking to do is make sure that we add value to our projects, but we leave nobody behind. And what I mean about that is, what we've been seeing in Ukraine for the last 4 years, what we've seen in Gaza, what we're now seeing, we've seen in Sudan, we've seen in Iran. The conflict today will leave a legacy that, until it is removed, will stop those countries recovering, and they will have a long-term effect on things like the global economy. And I think what we've got here we've seen in Ukraine over the last 4 years, and I've briefed on this before, but now we're seeing in Iran, is when we have a conflict like this, we're talking about the legacy of the conflict, the mines and the unexploded ordnance, are stopping fields being planted, critical infrastructure being rebuilt, energy security, things now we're seeing in the Gulf, like refineries being destroyed, mines potentially being deployed in the Strait of Hormuz. Until those are removed, you cannot start the recovery process. And in Ukraine, it's been bad enough where we're talking about an $11 billion impact a year to the Ukrainian economy from the presence of mines, a reduction in between 3 and 5% of GDP growth, and the effects of global energy prices and more importantly still, effects of global food prices and food security. What we're now seeing in the Iranian conflict is an even bigger consequence in terms of global energy prices. And what is the impact of having a $100 million tanker with $300 million of crude oil in it and being sunk? There's not just the economic consequence of that, there will be the environmental consequence, there's the loss of confidence and the increase in oil prices. We need to be in a position in all of these conflicts around the world that as soon as it is safe to operate, we can get in and we can conduct humanitarian demining operations, recovery operations, and rebuild the local economy and the global economy. To give you an idea of scale of a problem, this is a model of an artillery shell. These have been fired in Ukraine at a rate of around 10,000 a day for the last 1,500 days. That, if there is a 40% fail rate, we're talking around 6 million of these as unexploded ordnance. This is one weapon system. So if you start thinking about not just the use of artillery, but grenades, cluster munitions, and landmines, we are looking at a level of contamination that has not been seen outside in Europe since the end of the Second World War. These items cost thousands to make, but they can cost many times that to clear if we don't prepare properly. We need to have an investment, as Nick said, in clearing up this problem. We need to invest in new technologies, in new methodologies, in improving the human capital. And this is where I'm very proud of the support the UN has provided in Ukraine, where we work as one UN, the UN family. UNDP has a lead on the development side of things. WFP and the Food and Agricultural Organization are working on agricultural demining. We have UNHCR and IOM looking at returns, safe returns for refugees and IDPs. UNICEF working on risk education and children, delivering as one UN across Ukraine to try and make Ukraine a safer place and enable people to return. But again, there are challenges. So what do we need to think about? Mines are not just about mines in Europe. So what about the casualties? We have over 60,000 amputees, war amputees in Ukraine. Most of them men between the age of 25 and 55. What's going to happen when they come home? They're going to need to find jobs, they're going to need retraining, but there's also another dimension. Who is probably going to be responsible for looking after them? Probably their mothers, their wives, their girlfriends, their sisters, their daughters. What are we doing now to help prepare those women for the trauma they're going to have to deal with when, veterans, heroes, return home with shattered bodies and try and start to rebuild their lives? So there's so many aspects of mine action we need to be thinking about. It's not just about walking forward and cutting the red wire or the blue wire, but it's what are the consequences of this? How do we make it work? How can we make a difference? Afghanistan, we were doing so well in Afghanistan. We had a plan in 2013 that would have had Afghanistan mine-free by 2026. And then the international community walked away. It wasn't the poorest people of Afghanistan who chose to change the government. There were many political factors in it, but why are those people in Afghanistan abandoned by the international community when we were so close to having the success that would have turned Afghanistan into the Mozambique of Middle Asia? So just to finish off, I'm very happy to answer any questions, but a prolonged investment in mine action is an investment in peace, it's an investment in early recovery, it's an investment in moving things forward. And the new technologies that are being proven and trialed in Ukraine at the moment, use of AI, we developed a system with the State Emergency Services where over 30,000 square kilometers of land were assessed using satellite imagery, drone imagery with AI and human data analytics. That's 30 billion square meters of land was returned safely at a cost of around $100,000. Possibly the most effective mine action project ever done by the UN. We're seeing new sensors that can be mounted on drones. We're seeing underwater robotics. We're seeing demining robotic dogs that can go out and search areas safely. All of these require an investment, but that investment in the technology in Ukraine can be then replicated. I've spoken to colleagues in Syria, in Sudan, where the technologies that we're now using and rolling out and proving in Ukraine are working. They can go back to those countries, reduce the scale of the problem probably by 60 or 70% because of the use of these new sensors. Mine action is inherently inefficient. Even if you've got one mine per square meter, that does not occupy a square meter. So you're clearing out of your meter by meter square, 90% of it doesn't contain a mine. In reality, you don't find one mine per square meter, you find one mine per 10 square meters or per 100 square meters or per 1,000 square meters. But if there was one of these in your child's school's football pitch, you wouldn't want them to go and play soccer or football or rugby on it. So they're denying 50,000 square meters for one. Now, if we can find a way to take that down from one mine in 50,000 square meters to one mine in 10,000, to one mine in 500, to one mine in 10, which we're starting to do in Ukraine with the technology being developed, we are going to reduce the cost exponentially. And that technology can be exported around the world and help every mine-affected country. But we need that investment today. We need people to build on the success that we've got and not forget how important mine action is. And I think World Mine Action Day on the 4th of April is always a great time to remember that. Thank you.
All right. Thanks very much. We'll now open up the floor for questions. And besides introducing yourself, I'd appreciate it if you indicate which of the speakers you are directing your questions to. First question goes to Edith Lederer.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. I actually have questions for all of you. First, you said, I believe it's Nicholas, said that Afghanistan had the third highest casualty rate. What's the first? What's the second? And to you and to Paul, you talked about new technology. What kind of an investment are you talking about that's needed? Are you talking about tens of millions, billions to actually use this technology and get rid of unexploded ordnance and landmines in a much, much shorter period of time? And one of the big issues in the Iran war is sea mines, and I wonder if you have any information about that. And Nicholas, can you tell us how much money is needed in the Afghan program? Thank you. That's a lot of questions.
Please.
Maybe Nick, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Edith, for the question. On the third highest casualty rate in the world, this was from a report published on the 1st of December last year in the Landmine Monitor, and Afghanistan sits behind Myanmar and Syria, but I don't know their numbers. What we need in Afghanistan to conduct the clearance over the next 5 years in accordance with a plan submitted through the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention in 2024 is just over $250 million over a 5-year period. So we're talking a lot of money. The reason I say there's opportunity in Afghanistan is because we have the people here to do it. Once a program of 15,000, now a program of 1,300. Most of those people are still here. They can be re-employed. We've got a depth of expertise here. We just need the funding to get them working, and we're way down the list of the priorities now. But yeah, just over 250 million is what was asked in the APNBC. Thanks.
Thank you. If I could just add to that, Ms. Lederer, thank you for the question in terms of the innovation. So it's an important question, and it leads me actually neatly from Nick's response, which is talking about the funding for UNMAS. So last year, just as an example, we were able to, the UN Mine Action Service raised about $74.9 million for its projects. Sounds great, but if you think about then, right, one project costing 100 million, 200 million in terms of need, it's not enough. And one thing that I'd like to point out is that with that, a lot of the fundraising that we do is for specific projects. And so we will have a member state saying, you know, our interest is in Syria, our interest is in Afghanistan, we would like to help in these countries. Where we lack the funding is in the unearmarked funds. And unearmarked is extremely unsexy, but what it does is it gives us a little bit of the money to be able to carry forward projects that may be losing funding where we know that we would like to make the investment. It allows us to look into some of this innovation in terms of technologies, in terms of new ways of doing business, and say, okay, you know, we understand member states or donors do not want to be spending this kind of money on something that's unproven. We have faith, you know, we'd like to look into a potential project. And without the unearmarked funds, it becomes very difficult to do. Let me hand over to Paul in terms of the sea mines and the other innovation.
Sure. The question you asked was about what will it cost. I mean, Ukraine is a different scale to what we've seen in other mine action programs, primarily because we're still dealing with a live conflict, and the scale of weapon systems being used, and so, to be honest, some of it is humanitarian demining, but a lot of it is about recovery. You know, and if we're clearing. if we're able to, by clearing explosive hazard in Ukraine, and this seems a bit dated considering what's in Iran at the moment, but shift global oil prices by 1 cent or 2 cents a litre, or the cost of a loaf of bread by 3 or 4 cents per loaf, you know, a box of pasta by a couple of cents, but you apply that to billions of boxes of pasta or billions of litres of fuel, then the investment in Ukraine is very small. Obviously, that's quite dated considering what we're seeing going on in Iran at the moment. But the types of technology we talk about is, you know, one of the things I'd like to do is have a proven drone technology with every team in Ukraine. And that will help the monitoring and evaluation. You know, obviously, Ukraine is a very big country, so rather than us drive for 6 or 8 hours to visit a team, we could actually ring up the team, say, turn on the Starlink, put the drone up, and we can remotely visit the site. Oh, the team's in the right place, the safety vehicle's in the right area, the marking's looking good, the D-miners seem to be well disciplined. Great, we now don't need to drive for 7 hours to see if that team's okay. So, you know, we would save a lot of cost by using this technology. Now, the pilot project to run this out, we're looking at maybe $1 million to $2 million. To deploy at scale, probably about 10 million. But, you know, the Ukrainian mine action program is about $300 million a year. So we're not looking at a large percentage cost. It's more about proving this technologies work. And as you know, the example I used of the satellite imagery being analysed by AI and data analytics, the biggest challenge in that wasn't actually the adoption of the technology, it was getting people to accept that the recommendation that that area probably was not mined, so could be used, so it became more of a communications challenge. You know, this land has no evidence of being mined, you can use it. Reassuring the individual on the ground was much harder than doing the assessment. And again, the different platforms that are out there. So in terms of technological investment, we're talking about millions of dollars that will lead to tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of savings in Ukraine. But again, if this technology works and is proven, it will save tens of millions of dollars across the world, and probably, you know, I would think, bring down the time to make the world mine-free, which was meant to be 2026, ironically. You know, we can probably reduce that time by 50, 70% if these technologies that we think are working in Ukraine can be scaled, can be rolled out, and can be multiplied. So, you know, we're there. One of the challenges in Ukraine is technologies are evolving. You know, when I arrived in Ukraine, most of the contamination was in areas that had been liberated from the occupiers or on the front line. Now, with the widespread use of long-range drones, we're starting to see more and more contamination, not just in the east of the country, but in the west, and going out. And we've got police teams or state emergency service teams having to respond to ever bigger drones flying into civilian buildings across the countryside. But the Ukrainians are incredibly resilient and robust. I have a friend who lives in a building. A drone flew into it at midnight. They were evacuated from the building. The police deployed. The drone, fortunately, didn't explode. The police deployed, and they had the drone cleared and removed from the building, and they were back in their apartments in 2.5 hours. Can you imagine if somebody had an explosive device in New York? NYPD would be there for 3 days before we got back into our apartments. So, so the Ukrainians are incredibly resilient, incredibly robust, and are working well, but they need the investment. And then we need to learn from that investment and take it to other countries. Sea mines, slightly, first of all, let me stress, I am not a sea mine expert. I have never cleared a sea mine. I've cleared a lot of land mines, but one of the things that is okay about land mines is when you lay them, as long as it doesn't flood or have an earthquake, it stays there. So you're working in 2 dimensions. Okay, the depth may be between 0 and 20 centimeters, but it's pretty much a 2-dimensional problem. When you're dealing with sea mines, they can be on the surface, they could be floating in the middle, or they could be on the seabed. So you're already going into 3 dimensions. But if they're not secured, then you have tide, they may be propelled in some way, so you go into a 4th dimension, which is time. So and they tend to be a lot bigger explosives. So you're taking a problem that, on land is a 2-dimensional problem that is relatively straightforward to deal with, to a 3-4-dimensional project in the water, And again, if you stand on a mine as an individual, it's not very good for you. If you're in a vehicle, it's not very good for you in the vehicle. If you're in a super tanker with a million barrels of oil in it, it's not very good for anybody. So the consequences of getting it wrong is much more severe, and it's a much more complex and more challenging environment to deal with. And are those sea mines under remote control? Are they magnetically influenced? Have they got a sensor to target it? What are your countermeasures to it? And this is why traditionally sea mine clearance has been done by member states, by navies like the American Navy, the British Navy, the Japanese, whatever, because it requires a lot of technology, a lot of investment. It's very complicated and it's very dangerous. So the failure to have that capacity in the Straits of Hormuz is probably going to lead to a humanitarian problem, but I'm not sure that anybody will give the UN enough money to clear it. So I think it will remain with member states.
Abdulhamid?
Thank you for the briefing. My name is Abdulhamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I have a few questions. First, if Ms. Kazuma, sorry if I miss you. Yeah, about your presence in Gaza, if you can tell us some information about Gaza. And second, maybe Paul can answer that. If you have lost any of your staff during the field work, if you can share with us some information about the risk you face. And the other thing is about advocacy. You said you complained about the low funding of the program, but I don't see landmine action staff are working around the clock to promote your great work. You have Goodwill Ambassador. Do you have some documentary to share? I remember Judy Williams, when she started this to ban landmines, she got the Nobel Prize in 1998, I think. So do you have some celebrities working for your department? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Abdelhamid. It's nice to meet you. My name is Kazumi. I wanted to just maybe what we should do is we should get you in touch with our OPT people. One thing that I do want to say is that in the past year, UNMAS did undertake a number of mine assessments. We had about more than 1,000 explosive ordnance assessments that had taken place in 2025. And it supports the work, as you probably know, of over 30 UN programs and agencies in the country. The dynamic, I think you probably know better than I do, shifts so quickly that I'm not able to give you like a real world projection. I can tell you that we have had deminers trained, so nearly 2,000 trained in 2025 as well. And as a result of the work, we had been able, to ensure safe access. One of the things that I'd like to maybe invite you to is we will, I think from tomorrow, right, Lee, we'll have what we're doing is in order to commemorate the International Day, we have a mini film festival that's going to be launched online as from tomorrow. One of the films that I think is especially touching is actually on the occupied Palestinian territories. So I'll invite you to look at that as well. And we're happy to put you in touch with our project manager, our chief of mine action in the country. In terms of, global advocates, it's kind of music to my ears. I am, as you know, new to the position, and we did have notable personalities in the past. What we would like more than anything, I think, is to raise awareness in the general public of the potential and the problems of mine action. And in order to do so, we would like to have a global advocate. I hope to have an announcement at some point, but we're still in the process of looking at the potentials. Thank you.
Thanks. I've actually lived in Khartoum for 3 years and was part of the Palestine-Gaza response in 2009 and 2014. And I think the problem with mine action is it's sexy today and gone tomorrow. So when it's happening, everybody's interested, and then there is another emergency, another earthquake, a financial shock, and then it comes back. But you know, we go in cycles. I mean, you know, Afghanistan in 2001, 2002, people were throwing money at us. Now it's the begging bowl. You know, we've had some very high-profile celebrities over the years. You know, we've had Giles Dooley, who is a great advocate for people with disabilities. We had Daniel Craig, you know, who drew attention. And again, online, you can see their visits to field programs. We had Jeremy Renner went to Afghanistan, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. And of course, the most famous image of any celebrity working through a minefield is Princess Diana in '97 walking through Angola. So I don't think it's necessary to have celebrities. I think it's necessary to keep reminding people of how mines affect them and their lives. You know, you turn around and, you know, mines seem a long way away, but if I was to say to you, you know, you are paying 5 cents more for your bagel every morning because of the war in Ukraine, you know, over the course of a year, that's a few dollars. If you multiply that by 10 million people in New York, that's quite a lot of money. So, you know, how do we find ways to make that connection so people see it? And I think, you know, Nick's point about, you know, it's always children who suffer the most. I mean, the thing is, you know, if an adult stands on a mine like this, they're probably going to lose their lower limb. If a child stands on this, because they're so much closer to the blast and because as a ratio of their body weight to the explosive content, the impact is much higher. So it will either tear the leg off or both legs off much higher up and greater wounds, or quite often result in death, whereas for an adult it wouldn't. So children always seem to bear the consequence of it. And then you have things like these and these, which just look, you know, they're not toys, but they could easily be mistaken for toys. And again, I think the example of Nick, you know, I've so many times over the years, I've investigated an incident where a child or children have found one of these, thrown it into the fire, either intentionally to make it go bang, or just out of curiosity, and not realizing that this is surrounded by, you know, 50, 100 ball bearings that will come out of that fire very fast and very hard. And so, you know, we've got, and this is where, you know, there are 5 pillars of mine action. One of them is risk education. One of them is victim assistance. So it's not just about the clearance, it's about the other pillars, you know, removing the stockpiles, advocating for engagement on this system. So, yeah, your question is very valid. In terms of celebrity, yes, we're very happy to engage with them. I mean, in Ukraine, we have one of the Eurovision Song Contest, Ukrainian Song Contest winners has become very actively engaged in the subject recently. She performed at a conference in Tokyo. We're hoping she'll go to Geneva next month for another conference. So, yes, celebrity engagement is very important.
Okay. Namo?
Thank you very much. Now, Abdullah with Rudao Media Network. I just have one question. The New York Times, the Washington Post, and other major U.S. media outlets have reported that the United States may have dropped anti-tank mines inside Iran. Have you seen those reports, or are you looking into them to see, and how concerned are you? Thank you. For Ms. Kazumi, maybe, or Mr. Paul Heslop. Thank you.
You may have. I have not seen anything, but I don't know if you have anything.
I haven't seen reports of that in Iran, but we're certainly seeing mines delivered remotely by drones in Ukraine, both anti-personnel and anti-tank, or perhaps rather say anti-tank, anti-vehicle. And so I would not be surprised to see. I mean, again, there are many different types of mines, and it depends on the context of where they're being used. You know, mines or explosive weaponry, submunitions like this, being used on the front line in a combat situation is one thing. Mines being delivered indiscriminately, remotely into civilian population areas, you know, well back from the front line is a very different context. And so, you know, and there are many nuances to what does and doesn't constitute a war crime. But I think it's very clear that weapons being directed at enemy combatant forces falls into one category, but weapons being delivered indiscriminately against civilian targets, you know, falls into a war crime. Not knowing the context of Iran, we don't have a program in Iran. We have nobody on the ground in Iran. You know, we can talk about the threats that are being created from the conflict, from what we're seeing. You know, the deep buried bomb problem we saw in Gaza will definitely be a deep buried bomb problem in Iran. You know, we've heard of 9,000 bombs, the numbers are 9,000 targets have been hit. If you work on 5 to 10% failure rate, we're going to have between 450 and 900 UXO sites that will need to be investigated.
Okay, I see no further questions. So once more, I would like to thank our guests from the United Nations Mine Action Service, Kazumi Ogawa, the director, Paul Heslop, special advisor to the resident coordinator in Ukraine, and Nick Pond, chief of the Mine Action Service in Afghanistan. Thank you very much. I'm particularly thankful that those are on the table are just models and not actual things. Thanks, and have a great day, everyone.
Just one announcement on the 4th.